Hello everyone, today we have Christian with us. Christian is a PhD student with 3D AI lab at Technical University of Munich, advised by Prof. Angela Dai. His research focuses on reconstructing static 3D environments and understanding human behavior within them, including human action prediction and motion forecasting. Before joining the 3D AI lab in 2019, he worked on real-time methods of fusing RGB-D data into 3D representations and improving the quality of such reconstructions. Following this line of work, he co-authored a CVPR 20 paper on sparse generative neural networks. He also received his M.Sc in Informatics in 2019 at TUM, and before that, his B.Sc in Informatics and Multimedia at University of Augsburg. We're glad to have you with us today, and we're going to discuss his work on forecasting characteristic 3D poses of human action. Please go on.
Yes, so thanks a lot for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here. Yes, so as you already said, I worked on forecasting characteristic 3D poses of human actions. And this one, we worked together last year with my supervisor, Angela Dai, here at UM, and also collaborated with Tom Funkhauser, who is now working as a research scientist at Google. Okay. Yes, so I want to start with a little bit of motivation. So we are talking about, or mostly about these intelligent assistance systems nowadays, right? And it's very important for them to actually understand how you would interact with humans. So we usually think, so if you look at this nice fellow here, they usually work together in one shared environment, right? So you have the human working there, and then you want the robot to assist the human in this environment, which is also a first step towards all of this autonomous robots and also the vehicles in the end, if you follow through, like going to streets from there. And it's all about shared environments and working with humans. So this slide is actually from a different paper I'm going to present later, like a baseline paper to my paper. But it visualizes very well why we need actually prediction. So if you look at this, it's from the movie Avengers. Tony gets his suit taken off. And then the question is, can we do this with perception? Right? If we see how he's going to move, can we take it off? And there we have to say there will always be some kind of delay between seeing what's happening and acting on it, right? So we actually have to act proactively here. We have to see what his pose is like right now, and then also predict where the pose, where the human is going to be in a few seconds to get rid of this delay, basically, and to seamlessly remove the suit. So this one we can do with prediction. Yes, this is another paper, and the details aren't so important right now, but I just want to show how prediction looks like nowadays. So you have here in gray some kind of seed sequence, and then you predict the next few time steps here in color. And then you have some kind of ground truth, which are the gray skeletons again. And you have the prediction of different qualities in color here. So some frames of seeding, and then the prediction and ground truth. Right? And you do this for a few seconds, usually.
Hi, Christian, your screen is not changing, I guess. It is in motivation page, is it right?
Sorry?
It is on the motivation page. I'm not sure the screen is moving or not. You're in second slide or third slide?
This one?
So you are in.
So it seems like you have been, the slides are not following, like it is still stuck on motivation.
Oh, it's stuck, okay.
I'll pause.
I'll just start here again. This one. All right, sorry for that. Okay, so previously I talked about how you need predictions to proactively act with a human. Let's see, oops. Okay, yeah, and then now I'm just showing a video of how predictions look nowadays, right? So we have this gray seed sequence again. Here, that's the input. And then we predict in color, those are our predictions. And then we have, depending on the method we use, we have varying quality. But all of these methods basically compare against one sequence, which is they take the seed sequence and then they just continue this as ground truth and then measure the quality. All right. Yeah, so some previous work, actually this field is relatively new. So this is one of the first papers from 2017. And what they did is relatively straightforward. So you have this seed sequence again, and then you have a recurrent neural network, an RNN. In this case, we have a block of LSTMs, and they memorize the actual poses that come in the future. So you have a training set, you learn the LSTMs on them, and then you have a test set, and the test time you actually predict using these hidden states from the LSTMs, you predict the next few timeframes. This is what this paper did. And for this case, you get very good short-term prediction because you memorize basically what you should see in the future, given what you have seen in the past. The problem with these RNNs and LSTMs is that you can't get much further than a few frames into the future, because it's basically a well-known problem with LSTMs that you can only memorize so much.
Yeah, slides are changing as well.
Okay, right. Good. All right, so okay, so basically, yes, previous work. So this one was one of the first works, and they used straightforward just LSTMs to memorize what they've seen, and then you can reproduce the future basically from what you've seen, what you've memorized from LSTMs. But then you run into the problem that LSTMs get saturated after some point. So the problem here being that the more you have to memorize, the more you lose in the past, basically, meaning you can't go above 1 second, basically, usually of pose predictions. This is now a newer paper from ECCV 2020. And what they actually tried is to replace this LSTM model with an attention model, which also which is a pretty cool idea. And they actually produce much better predictions because the memorization quality is much better with attention. But they also only go up to 1 second. So, depending on how many frames you have and your frame rate, that usually means you have to produce at 30 FPS, you have to produce 30 poses per second, which is quite a lot already. Yes, so up to 1 second is fine. And then once you want to go above 1 second, and if you think about it, most actions actually take longer than 1 second, right? If you, I don't know, eating or something, you eat for longer than 1 second, if you want to predict eating. What does work for more than 1 second in previous works is periodic movement. So if you think of walking, for example, you can say if you make a step and you learn to repeat this one step, of course you get longer predictions because it's much easier to predict this periodic movement. So in this case, we get longer predictions, but for these aperiodic movements, you don't get longer than 1 second. This is one, not sure if it's working, but that's one different paper again. And they do actually dancing synthesis, which is also a periodic movement, which means they go above 1 second. Okay, one more slide to visualize this. So this is actually from our data set now. You can see the humans standing in front of a table with some object on top, and they should interact with the object now. And you can imagine, so I'll just play it. So drinking, we have drinking, we have pouring, and we have passing. And now if you only predict 1 second for each of these actions, we get very different results. So for passing, for example, 1 second is enough. So we have the passing action here. For pouring, it's kind of halfway there. And for drinking, it's not there at all, basically, because drinking takes much longer than 1 second. So in our work, what we try to do is to actually predict the actual action poses. So we don't want to just predict the 30 poses up to 1 second, but we predict a pose that might be multiple seconds into the future even. So it's like a key moment in time of this particular action. And that's what it looks like. So these are the same ones as before, but now we have drinking, which is actually a drinking pose. We have an actual pouring pose, and we have the same passing pose because that's exactly at the 1 second mark. All right. So more specifically, what we're doing is we have an input pose like this, which consists of 25 joints. And we predict this one pose down here, which is an action defining, like a characteristic pose, as we call it, because it characterizes this one action very well. Right, and then if you look at this from a distance, you can say it's actually more goal directed. So the previous methods were more time directed. So you want to predict 1 second, but now we actually want to predict a goal with longer than 1 second predictions. Yeah, that's what basically this teaser image shows. So we have an input at time 0, and then we have different sequences here, different rows, where we want to predict this one pose, which might be at 1 second, but it might also be at 4 seconds, for example. And in our data set, we actually have sequences going up to 8 seconds into the future. Yeah, and you can see this passing down here, for example, ends already after 3 seconds. And it's just frozen, while this one's still going on, doing more stuff. And here are just some more samples, what this looks like. So we always have in color the input and the target. And in between, we just have snapshots of this one sequence of poses. And now we can very well see if we were to cut the prediction at 1 second, we wouldn't capture most of them, right? We would lose most of these sequences because we only predict up to this point. All right, so that all sounds fine. But now the problem is, how do we actually predict this, right? So that's also the problem with all the previous methods. Because we are predicting the future, we can't be sure what's going to happen. And there's also no clear ground truth of what should happen. If you imagine you have, as an observation, you have something like picking up an apple. Then you don't know, are you going to eat the apple, or do you maybe pass the apple to someone? So this is why we can't just predict one future, but we have to take into account this multimodality of the future. So basically we say it's possible with some certainty measure. It's possible that it's passing, but it's also possible that it's just, eating for the apple. And then because we don't get as much information as we want from this initial pose, right, we have to model just multiple futures. There is some previous work in this domain, mostly in 2D, or actually all of them are in 2D. So this is just one example, also from CVPR 2020. So what they're doing is they have some discrete heat map over the future pedestrian positions. And then in the end, they can refine this path to get multiple paths that are all possible in the future, basically. But this one is all for pedestrians and all from like above in 2D. Same one for this paper, that's a little bit older, from CVPR 2016. What they're trying to do is to model also these pedestrian paths here, but also model the interactions between pedestrians, basically. And they also model a heat map of possible future locations. And you can see like the red dots are high confidence, which is in the near future. And then the further you get from the current present, the more uncertain it gets. So that's the way most people do it in 2D nowadays. Okay, so now we want to transform this into 3D. And where we spend the most time actually is to find a good data set for this, because it turns out you can have synthetic data sets which don't give you all, which are very limited basically in the motions you get. This way it's much worse than the 3D data sets that you get nowadays. So we went looking, and actually there's one data set that works pretty well in our regard. So this one is the GRAB data set from ECCV 2020. They basically track a human from T-pose to grabbing an object here, to performing an action with it, putting it back, and then having the T-pose again. That's what we see here. And they actually have around 1.5K of these sequences with 29 different actions. All right, so what we want to do now is to take this human from the dataset and then extract 25 body joints. Like those joints are in very interesting positions, like elbows, hands, the feet, and they all follow the open pose. Yep.
Yeah, there's a question. I was going to mention OpenPose itself, that I've used OpenPose for key point detections. And when we are talking about key point detections in 3D, the only difference is the coordinates, right? Everything else remains same.
Right, yeah. So it's just in 3D, basically. Yeah.
Right.
But
right. So the 2D datasets cannot be conformed into a 3D dataset?
They can. So the problem is, so you need some kind of 3D information, right? You can't just back project to 3D. So what some datasets do is they have also the depth map, like a Kinect depth map or something. Yes. But then we also tried this actually, but then you have the problem that the Kinect tracking is very inaccurate. And if you want to actually have, you know, well-tracked skeletons like these ones, it's very hard to get them from Kinect or from 2D datasets. That's why we were so happy about this dataset, because they actually have very good tracking, which took them like 50 cameras and a crazy setup.
I see. All right. Please go ahead.
Right. Okay, yeah, so we have this open pose. So you can see we just transform all the skeletons in the sequence to our format. And then what we do is we have this input. So we define actually as input the contact of the pose with the object. And then we manually annotate for each sequence what the target should be. So in this case, we see drinking is having the cup in front of the face, basically. And we define this manually for all of the sequences. These are some more examples. And you can see, actually, we have quite a big variety of actions. So like parsing, pouring. And within parsing, we even have different kinds of parsing. You can pass to the right, to the left, to the front. We also have different actors. So we have 10 different actors with all different heights and like body shapes. Right? So we get some diversity there already. And because we predict the 3D XYZ locations for each joint, we also can capture these differences in body shapes and heights. Yeah, just because I earlier said if we cut at 1 second, we lose lots of sequences. So this is basically a histogram of how long the sequences are we have. So number of sequences versus the time of the sequence. And here we can see most sequences actually take around 1.5 seconds, but we even have sequences with up to 8 seconds in duration. So the time between input and the action pose is 8 seconds for some of them. And most of them are above 1 second. Yeah, so this is again to visualize where we actually take the joints. So we have lots of joints in the head, and then the feet, and of course spine and the hips. All right. So once again, for all the sequences, we have an input and the target. And this input is our observation of the contact with the human, with the object. And target is the actual manually annotated action. And then from this scheme, we actually get our input target pairs, which we use for training in the end. Yeah. So as I said, we have this open pose, 25 body joints. For each of the body joints, we get the 3D XYZ world coordinates. And yeah, now for the output representation. So because we want to express this multimodality, we can't just output the XYZs for each joint, but rather we have to output a heat map. Basically, what we do is we have a volume around the person. So we center a volume at the hip for each person. And we have 16 to the power of 3 voxels in this volume. So we basically discretize the space. And for each of these voxels, we get a probability in the end. So for each joint, we have the probability of the joint being in this voxel at the end pose, basically. And what you can see here is the probabilities for the right hand of the skeleton. And already you can see here that this is a passing action, but it might be a right passing or a front passing, with the front passing more likely. Yes, so one more point we have to be careful about is that we want to have a coherent body in the end, right? So we don't just want to predict everything at once, but it's much more useful to predict the end effectors first. So if you think about it, in our case, we have, so it's just the case for our data set, we have the right and left hands doing most of the work, basically, because you have to pick up the object, you have to handle the object somehow, and that's why the hands are the most important ones here. So what we're doing is we just have different models for the right hand, for the left hand, and then for the rest of the body. And now what we can do is just take the previous predictions, so like the right hand, and condition the next prediction on this previous prediction. So we say we first predict the right hand, and then we predict the left hand given the right hand. And now we have a constraint on the rest of the body of right and left hand, and we basically just have to fill in this middle part of the body, which gives a pretty good constraint on the overall body in the end. Oops. Okay, so back to our method. So we have this input skeleton, and then depending on which stage we are at in our pipeline, we also have a previous join, so right hand, left hand, or both. For both, we learn an MLP, which gives us an input representation. We then have an attention model, which learns actually dependencies between joins. So because what we haven't been doing right now is giving the connections between joints, right? So the network doesn't even know that the hand is connected to the elbow. So what we're doing here is we don't give it explicitly, but we have the network actually learn which body parts belong to each other. Right. So the big advantage of this being, we can also learn implicit dependencies. So if you think about, for example, a walking motion, where you have the right hand moving forward, if the left foot moves forward, right? Then you have an implicit dependency there. And if the network can actually capture this, then the prediction will be much better than just knowing that the hand is connected to the elbow. Right, this attention gives us a latent vector in the end. And from this, we can actually decode the 3D heat map with a series of 3D deconvolutions. And then we get the heat map. And the output, yeah, is 25 heat maps.
Attention, right?
Oh, sorry, connection was pretty bad.
Sorry, I was asking that till attention model, we were working on body joints, and now like we are talking about 3D heat map decoder. So how does that come into picture? Like what is the input that is going into the decoder?
Right. So right, the attention just learns the connection between joints, still in joint space, so to say. And then what comes out of it is just a latent representation, like one vector, which can then be decoded to the heat map, basically. Because we learn, so first we learn which parts of the skeleton are important for this latent vector, and then we use it for the heat map in the end.
Mm-hmm. Right. Got it.
Right.
Thanks.
And the nice thing now is that we have a heat map and we can actually sample it to get the joints. So here we sample the right hand again, and we can see, because we have like a bunch of probabilities here and here, we can sample it on the right, so it's a right passing, or in the front, then it's a front passing. And now if we do this for all the joints, we get different poses, basically, for the same action. Yeah, so I just wanted to go a little bit more into the attention mechanism. That's just the standard mechanism for attention, which is called scaled dot product attention. Basically, from natural language processing, it has been known for a long time. And so what we're doing is basically just, we have representations for a query, a key, and a value. And then we learn a matrix, which is this A matrix here, the attention matrix, which gives us a correspondence between, the input joins and the output joins. And then we can see that for the output, so that's a 25 joins by 27 matrix. We can say that the last two columns here, which are red, have a much higher influence on the output than all the other joins do. So here, red is a higher attention, blue is a lower attention. And from this figure, we can actually see that the network learns to use information from the previous fingers much more than from all the other joints it has. Or we can also devise like the right angle is much more important for the big toe than all the other joints, something like this. And then what comes out of it is up here. That's then the latent vector that goes into the decoder. All right, so this was all the method up to here, the body prediction. And now the problem is if we look at this prediction, we see the artifacts of the volume discretization we had before. So you see it's a pretty good prediction, but it doesn't look very natural, which is because we discretized everything into a set of 16 to the power of 3 voxels. What we do now is just to have some kind of offline pose refinement in the last step to get a more natural pose out of it. Right, this is depicted here basically. So the important part is just this one. We have some prediction initially, and then we enforce several different properties on the skeleton, which makes it more natural in the end. So we have, for example, the bone length. So we take the observations we have from the input, measure the bone length between joints, and then just do a run optimization with this objective function, which enforces the bone lengths to be the input bone lengths. And what we also do is to have some kind of natural angles between joints. So we say, for example, the head can't be turned around, or the, if you look at the hip here, this is a very unnatural angle for a hip. So we try to optimize this one away. And what we achieve with this is just some kind of more natural predictions in the end. All right, so just some more details. I mentioned already we predict right hand first, then left hand, and then the rest of the body. And we actually train this heat map with a cross entropy loss, which turned out to perform the best. So what we're doing is just for each voxel, we basically classify the probability value into a set of bins. And then from there, we devise the actual probability percentage in the end. So each voxel independently gets one probability value assigned. And then what we do with the heat map is we take a non-max suppression to actually have a more diverse set of heat map peaks, and then randomly sample from that. Okay, so I just want to show you some results now. The main metric we're using is this mean per joint positional error, which is really just straightforward distance between the XYZ positions of the target here, minus the ones of the prediction, and all of this wrapped into an L2 norm. And then summed up over all 25 joints. All right. So to the comparison with baselines. Basically what we're saying now is we have this mean per joint positional error in meters. And of course, the less error we have, the better. So lower is better. And then, so the problem with the MPJPE is that it's an average error. So we take, over all samples, we take the average MPJPE. which means we can't really distinguish between do we have a set of very good predictions and like a few outliers, or do we have just mediocre predictions all the way? So what we're doing is, additionally to reporting this one, we report the percentage of samples that are below a certain threshold, like in this case, 15 centimeters and 25 centimeters. All right. So we can see we have our method down here. We have our method without refinement. We also have a deterministic version of our method, which just produces the poses in the end, not the heat maps. And then we have two deterministic baselines, which are these two methods, which of course also don't produce heat maps. That's why we also have our deterministic results here. And what we can see in the end, that even our before refinement result is better than the previous methods, right? So we have something like 14 centimeters versus their 16 or 17 centimeters. And then of course, once we refine, we get an even better result. So these were the...
Hi, Christian.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a question that in the architecture, we should consider the timing of the frame, right? For each frame, we'll have 16 cube cross 25, right? Output will be 16 cube cross 25.
So the 25 are the joints basically, right? We have 25 joints.
Yeah, 25 cross 16 cube is the output. So what about the timing, right? For each frame, we will have 16 cube cross 25 or?
Yeah, I mean, so for our case, we only have one frame. And then we modified also the baseline methods to have one frame output. And so we removed the time just completely.
So there is no time. Why we should remove it? We should predict it for future time frame, right? So time frame should be considered for E as input. So there should be a number of.
Yeah. So the idea is kind of like opposite to this, right? We just remove all notion of time, and then we say our method can perform better because it doesn't depend on this fixed time frame, and the previous methods all depend on having one fixed time frame.
So for the K heat maps which are sampled, so how to know that which is the which time frame it corresponds to? From the heat map, we'll sample K heat map, right? From the 16 cube cross 25.
What do you mean? But we only have one heat map, right? I mean, we have 25 heat maps for each joint, but only one for each joint.
Yeah. So if I ask at 4 seconds and if I ask at 1 second, so the output should be predicted at 1 second or the given time frame.
Yeah, but you only ask once, basically. We can't have different time steps. We only have this one output pose. Okay. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm not getting a question now. Sorry.
Yeah. So basically, the thing is that we are not having a repetitive analysis of the same pose. We're just predicting once.
Yeah. Is so if I ask at 1 second and 4th second, how to distinguish between them? So the output should be at the end for a fixed time frame, for a time moment, right?
I mean, the output would be the same. So let's say we have two different sequences, right? One action happens at 1 second, one at 4 seconds, but you only ask once for each of these sequences, and you get the correct action pose. So the network doesn't actually know when it happens. It just knows what it's going to look like in the end.
Okay, understood. So it is not considering the time frame.
Right.
Okay, great.
It's just,
thanks.
Yeah, that's because it's not time-based. It's just not goal-based. We just predict the one goal.
Right.
Right. So yeah, we have these baseline methods which also output one pose, and then also just to have a few more baselines, we also evaluated some statistical methods. Basically, This one's pretty interesting. So we can either take the average train. So let's say we have our training set and we just take the average pose over all the poses in the train set, which would mean that the network only learns this one average and always predicts the average, which is not the case because we get a much higher error here. The other thing you could think of is that the network only learns to classify the actions and then just spits out one action average pose, basically. So because we have 29 actions, we would have 29 average poses, and then the network just spits out these average poses, which is also not the case because the error is also much higher. The other baseline, which was actually devised in a paper beforehand, is the zero velocity baseline. So basically the idea being that the input pose is also a target pose, which works pretty well for some of the previous methods. And we can see also the performance is pretty good here. But it still gets beaten by our method, which means we predict better than the zero velocity. All right, so some of the visual results here. We have the two baseline methods here again, and our method here. And what we can actually see here is that that these deterministic baselines, they tend to have some kind of average behavior. So they either predict something that's like not doing much, so very low velocity, or something that's average for this action. So let's say passing, then the average is usually the forward passing. Whereas our method is able to predict more diverse actions. Okay, just to have some comparison of the ablations. So we have the input and target pairs again here for passing, playing, and shopping. And then we can see the difference between our method deterministically, our method before refinement, and our method with refinement and probabilistic predictions. And we can see that our deterministic version also performs pretty bad and mostly performs those, average predictions. With the no refinement version, we already get this more diverse set of predictions, but we have these artifacts again of, being basically snapped to the voxels. And then once we apply the refinement, we get actually natural looking poses that have the right, the right pose in the end. Okay, these are just some 3D visualizations. So it actually predicts pretty good 3D poses too. It doesn't just look good in 2D. All right. So then I can summarize already. So the main contributions of our work were to have this new task of forecasting these characteristic 3D poses. So once again, what we're doing is not to have this time-based prediction where we predict the 30 frames up to 1 second, but we predict this one pose, which is the goal of an action, which is not time-based anymore. And then if we try to apply these time-based methods to our task, we can actually see that our method performs much better. The second step was to have this multi-modality modeling, because we predict multiple seconds into the future, and then we can't be that certain anymore of what's going to happen. So we say that this is just inherently multimodal, and we tackle this by predicting heat maps, and in the end then to autoregressively sample these heat maps to get the skeleton joints in the end. Right. And on top of this, we have this new data set of input action goal pairs, which is necessary to evaluate this kind of task. All right, then thanks for listening.
The visualizations were great. The one thing I had, when you were mentioning about refinement of the pose, what do you exactly mean? Like, how is the refinement being performed?
Ah, right. So basically, it's just an optimization of these parameters we had right here. Yeah. So we have just the properties. Basically, we have the bone length and the angles between joints. And then we say these should be as close as possible to the input values. And then we just optimize this error function to be as low as possible and take the outputs from there.
Right. Nice.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, anyone else? Does anyone else have any questions?
So basically we need to have this bone lengths and angles in our data set, right? And so in your data set, we have this information. So for the test image.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, the good thing is that we actually have it already in the initial pose, basically. So we just calculate it from the initial pose observation we get anyways.
Okay, okay.
On the fly. Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? I have one question. Have you submitted the paper so far? Please?
Oh, sorry, connection was bad again.
Okay, I'm sorry. Have you submitted the paper anywhere?
Yeah, well, we finished in November.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Nice.
I mean, I think you're not supposed to say it publicly.
So I guess.
November.
Right. So we kind of always ask what were the reviewers' comments and all that. So I was moving to that question, but I guess not.
Right. No, we don't have reviews yet. So we're hoping for the best still.
Yeah. Right. So I guess there are no more questions for the day. The presentation was great, especially the visualization part, and the beginning was very interesting. And the whole motivation behind the paper, as well as the contributions, are very clear. So yeah, great paper. Right. Best of luck, and thank you so much for the talk.
Thanks.
Just a last question, Christian.
Yeah.
Actually, I was confused there. So basically, for it is, as you said, it is goal oriented. I mean, so for a particular time, it will output multiple predictions, right, for the poses. So as there can be multiple futures at that time. So how did you solve? I mean, so once you predict multiple futures, like how do you like calculate the error function? Like you take the one which minimizes the error that time, or like which one out of all possible futures?
Yes. So the thing is, we predict, we sample 6 different futures, and then we just take the one with the lowest error and evaluate this one.
Yeah. Got it. Right.
That's something most people do basically. So you have some kind of k, which is 6 in our case, and then you just take the minimum one.
Yeah, that sounds sensible. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I guess any more questions? No, hopefully no. Yeah, right. So thanks again, and we look forward to more awesome, great work in pose estimation domain from you. Thank you, Christian. I'll end the meeting.
Thank you, Christian.
Thank you for taking time, Christian. Yeah.